My name is Joanna Wyckoff, and I worked for Social Security Administration for 9.5 years at a local field office in Atlanta, Georgia. When I started at Social Security, I started serving the public and helping them be educated on what they qualified for. And I fixed their checks, I fixed their Medicare, I did their Medicare special enrollments, and did all their what we call post entitlement issues, meaning anything after they qualified for a check is what I did. And then later I qualified for a promotion to claims specialist. And when I became a claims specialist, I started taking retirement and disability claims and SSI claims, and what I had to do what they call adjudicate the claim and process payments. And when I was working as a claims specialist, so many people got so much wrong information. And sometimes they got the wrong information from the government itself, because there's so many policies out there that if someone doesn't give all of the facts, it's really easy to only get part of the story. And so we're going to go through basic entitlement and then how to fact find what someone actually might qualify for beyond the basics. So, Title II of the Social Security Act. This is Retirement Survivors Disability Insurance. And you always want to see, especially if someone's asking you to read a letter, what it says at the very top of that letter, because it's going to tell you the program it comes from. Social Security administers two different programs on top of Medicare. They administer Title II of the Social Security Act and Title 16 of the Social Security Act. Title II is what most people know as retirement disability. It's based off of the taxes that you paid in when you worked, or if you're a disabled adult child who became disabled before the age of 22, what your parents worked and paid into, and how you qualify on their record. Or if you're a disabled widow who became disabled within 7 years of the spouse passing, you can qualify and for disability on your own record on Title II. That is what Title II Retirement Disability Survivors Benefits and the Survivors Benefits is. You cannot get disability on someone else's record except being a disabled adult child or being a disabled widower. So if I'm married to somebody, I can't get disability on their record, except there's one policy, end stage renal Medicare. You can qualify for Medicare on your own record, a spouse's record, or a parent's record. When someone asks, Joanna, what am I entitled to? First, the very first thing you want to help them do is go into their own Social Security record at ssa.gov and look at their earnings history, and it will show you their earnings. It'll show you their Social Security earnings, and it'll show you their Medicare earnings. That's very important. There's two different earnings. It'll show you what they're entitled to, if they're entitled to a payment right then or future payments. It'll show if they're entitled to disability, if they're what they call date last insured for disability, because we can only be insured for a period of time. It'll show if there's a personal insurance amount, PIA, and it'll also show a family maximum amount. So if someone is insured for retirement or disability, they can collect benefits. And there's also money to be paid for minor children, a spouse with child in care, or survivors, or when you go to retire, a spouse. So the first part of understanding Social Security is that it's based on credits. And a credit is how you build your insurability. That's the key word that they use at Social Security, is insurability for retirement and disability and Medicare. So since 1929, you need 10 years, 40 quarters over the span to be qualified for retirement. However, for disability, it's a different rule. And the disability benefits How many credits you need for disability depends on how old you are when you become disabled. So, for example, if you are developed a disability before the age of 24, you generally only need a year and a half of work credits, which is 6 credits in the 3 years before your disability began. And a good case study is actually my sister. Abby became disabled at the age of 22, and she only needed 6 credits to get her full regular Social Security disability amount. But Abby had been working since she was 14. She had more than 6 credits. So when Abby finally got approved for disability, because sometimes it does take time, she was qualified for regular disability, even though she was rather young, and she got her Medicare 24 months later. If you're between the ages of 24 through 30, you generally need the credits for half the time between the age of 21 to when your disability began. And then a person with a qualifying disability, 31 and over, they generally need at least 20 credits in the 10 years immediately before their disability began. So a lot of times when someone gets disabled, they might not file right away. So we call that the date of onset, is the date that their disability actually began. And that could be a previous date, even if they don't file right away. So age 31 to 42, they need 5 years of work, which is 20 credits. And you might have someone who says, this is a common thing that we'll go into, I've been working and I don't receive Medicare. And that's a common issue, is because they might not have had enough credits when they became disabled to get regular Social Security disability. They might only qualify for a needs-based program. The other needs-based program is Title 16 of the Social Security Act. So a lot of it is the date of insurability of when they became disabled. So if someone thinks that they should apply for disability, I always encourage it, even if their work credits are not clear, because sometimes they have unreported wages, or maybe they were self-employed and didn't file their taxes appropriately. So I always refer someone to get a formal decision. But as you can see, the credits needed, you only need 40 credits at age 62 or older to qualify for disability. So the younger you are, the less credits you need before you qualify for disability. One of the common issues I see arise is people take time off of working, maybe to be a parent or a stay-at-home spouse or a caregiver to an aging parent, or maybe they're just, financially stable and they don't need to work for somebody else. Well, what happens is they stop becoming insured after they stop filing their taxes. So let's say I took 5 years off of work to be a caregiver or raise a child. The clock starts ticking on when my date of last insurability could be. And it's usually 5 days after you last have a working credit, 5 years after you have a working credit. Credits also affect the ability for your survivors to collect benefits on your record. So you need up to 10 years of work credits for your survivors to collect benefits, but the younger you are, the less credits you need, just like on disability. So the rule is survivors of very young workers may be eligible if the deceased worker was employed for 1.5 years during the 3 years before their death. So unfortunately, I've had very young workers pass before the age of 25, but if they had 1.5 years, their survivor benefits are usually there. And that's why I always refer it, even if it's a young person, maybe 19, 20 years old, if they were working at 16, 17, they probably are insured for survivor benefits. So Social Security survivor benefits can be paid to several different people. First, a surviving spouse who can collect full benefits at full retirement age or reduced benefits as early as 60. Now, this is the very first time that someone can collect benefits before the age of 62 by being a widow or widower. A surviving spouse with a disability can collect as early as 50 as long as they become disabled within 7 years of that deceased person's death and is insured for more money on the deceased record than they are on their own record. A surviving spouse of any age who takes care of the deceased child, the child must be younger than the age of 16 or have a disability and receive Social Security benefits. They don't have to be married, they just have to have the deceased child in their care. It's called parents' benefits, mothers, fathers' benefits. So they can receive 50% set to 75% of the amount. Certain divorced spouses can receive survivor benefits. Unmarried children younger than the age of 18 up to age 19 if they're attending elementary or secondary school full-time. This would be like our high school. So a lot of times students don't graduate until after their 18th birthday. So as long as they're a full-time student with a student certified report, they can collect student benefits up until they're 19. It used to go until college and they stopped that a long time ago, back in like the 80s. Unmarried children age 18 or older who develop a disability before the age of 22 and whose conditions remain the same. This is disabled adult child benefits, whether their parent is living or deceased. They are protected and can collect benefits. Dependent parents age 62 or older, that is very rare. And then the credits, we know them in the Medicare industry, is you usually have to have 40 credits for free Part A in the United States. The other criteria is if you have a disability, you can get Medicare after 24 months of entitlement of the disability. So there's usually 5 months of a waiting period plus 24 months is when the Medicare entitlement starts. There is 2 exceptions. The first one is Lou Gehrig's disease. You just have to be approved for disability and the Medicare can start immediately. There's no 24-month wait period for that. The other one is end-stage renal disease. End-stage renal disease, you don't have to wait 24 months. You just have to be on dialysis for 4 months, and the dialysis clinic has to complete that report, and we're going to go into that in the next session. So you may encounter some former federal employees to say that they didn't pay into Social Security wages, and it's because they paid into a private pension. Since 1984, federal employees have paid into Social Security, so they can collect what they call FERS pension, plus Social Security, and have their Medicare entitlement. Railroad employees with more than 10 years of service also qualify for coverage. Employees of some states and local governments that chose not to pay into Social Security do not. So this is normally found with teachers, police officers, firefighters, people who pay a private pension instead of paying Social Security taxes. They normally don't have their Social Security taxes except if they moonlight for a different job, and that's normally, I see it a lot in police officers. Normally police officers have like 20 different jobs, but most of them have like security jobs or working for different companies and stuff doing law enforcement. Like I see them at churches doing traffic navigation and stuff. If they work a different job and pay into Social Security through those jobs, or maybe they had a previous employment history before working for their service or after, then they might have insurability for Social Security then. But then there's another rule that's applied called windfall elimination provision. We're going to go into that later. Children younger than 21 who do household chores for a parent are also excluded from that Social Security wages. Now, there's a difference between Social Security wages and Medicare wages. So somebody can pay into Medicare wages and not Social Security, like teachers. So many teachers, almost all of them now after 1983, pay Medicare wages, even though they pay into a private pension. So when they turn 65, they do get free Part A, and they pay for their Part B. And usually, a lot of times, they might have a teacher's retirement group plan that's afforded to them, but they do pay into Medicare wages and do qualify for a free Part A. And I recently had that in a Facebook group where somebody was taking care of their spouse, and she's like, he doesn't qualify for Social Security because he's getting a pension. She was saying that his medical expenses are so high. I said, why isn't he getting Medicare? She's like, I don't think he qualifies for Medicare because he doesn't qualify for a Social Security check. I said, it's two different things. If he had 40 credits paid in for Medicare, and they normally do, then he can qualify for Medicare at 65, even if he doesn't qualify for a retirement check. One of the things that is your duty as the earner, the number holder, is to make sure that your earnings is accurate. So many times I've encountered people who's had zeros sitting on their earnings record, which affected their insurability for either retirement or disability. I'll show you. Those zeros impact their Social Security retirement amount. And if they don't have 40 quarters before that or after that, their insurability for retirement altogether. Now, thankfully, it appears that this person has 40 credits regardless of those zeros, but those zeros are impacting their amount that they should have received if those zeros are not correct. So if someone has missing wages, which happens sometimes when someone is self-employed and their tax professional doesn't file their self-employment correctly or takes too many deductions, which happens a lot in the self-employment world. Some people who do taxes, allow so many deductions that they try to get it down to zero, but you want those minimum credits. Remember, we have to have $1,740 for one credit, and that means that you actually have to pay taxes on that. You can't pay zero and then also get your Social Security credits. You want to pay at least the minimum, even if it's babysitting or cooking or having a yard sale, so you get your minimum credits for those years, especially if you're trying to maintain insurability. So one of my best advices for people who are missing a credit or a couple credits is to see if they can do some type of self-employment to fill in those gaps, right? So if I'm going to intentionally be unemployed, maybe I'll continue to do some type of self-employment like babysitting or selling cookies and filing self-employment taxes. So I at least get my $1,740 a quarter. So I maintain my insurability in the event that I have an accident or disability like cancer, and I don't have to go without check or insurance. Speaking of credits, we're going to talk about Medicare qualified government employee. Medicare government employee, they are the school teacher, and on their work credits, you're going to see where they have the earnings tax for Medicare here on the right column, and those zeros on the left means that they had usually a pension that they're not paying Social Security wages for, but they qualified for Medicare over here. So the policy for Medicare qualified government employees, RS 01401.010, and the MQGE, Medicare qualified government employee, are wages of federal, state, and local government employees who are in positions mandatory covered by Medicare hospital insurance. They're not covered for old age survivors or disability insurance. Like I said, it's usually firefighters, police officers, school teachers, the most common in these positions. It could be, other local government officials, but usually the key phrase I ask is, do you have a private pension system that does not pay Social Security taxes, and on your W-2, does it have zero on the Social Security box? And I'll show you. The next thing people always ask is, what information do they need to file, when they can file, and if they are entitled on someone else's record, and how to determine if that is a true eligibility. So in order to file for benefits, they just have to be of an entitlement age or criteria. So if they're disabled, you can always file for disability before your full retirement age. In this year, 2024, the full retirement age is 67. So if someone's disabled at 65, they should file for disability so they get their full retirement amount and don't take any reduced credits, which we'll talk about soon. If someone they want to take their reduced Social Security amount, again, they can file as soon 3 months before their 62nd birthday. They can file. You can't file 6 months or a year ahead. I know some people think that, hey, I want to get my work into Social Security so they don't forget about me. There's just simply no way for the computer to take that information more than, it's actually 4 months before the person's 62nd birthday, 3 months usually. And then usually 3 months before someone's 65th birthday, if they are not going to take their Social Security retirement, they can file for Medicare. And then who else's record they can file on. They changed the rule. You used to be able to file on someone else's record, like a spouse, and then delay your own. However, they changed that law. And when you file on your record or someone else's now, you file on all records at the same time unless you're a widower. So the Bipartisan Act of 2015 changed so much when I was working at Social Security. We had to relearn our entire job. When this came about, before then, people could file on their spouse and delay their own, and then it stopped. And the incentive, the benefits were, people thought they would get an increase, and they did. But when the policy was written for Social Security back in the 30s, it was because it wasn't a 2-household income. And now that has changed, and we have been trying to spread out the Social Security Trust Fund, so they had to make some changes. So before the change, previously some spouses received spousal benefits at the full retirement age while letting their retirement benefits based on their earnings record grow by delaying or filing for that benefit. And if you turn 62 before January 2nd, 2016, you are eligible for benefits both as a retired worker and a spouse. In the first month you want your benefits to begin and you're not full retirement age, you must apply for both benefits, known as deemed filing. So now it's deemed filing. You apply for everything on your own and your spouse's, ex-spouse's record at the same time. If you turn 62 on or after 2016 and you're eligible for benefits both as a retired worker and as a spouse or divorced spouse in the month that you want your benefits to begin, then deemed filing applies at age 62 and extends to full age retirement and beyond. So deemed filing means that when you file on either your retirement or a spouse's retirement benefit, that you're required or deemed to have filed for the full benefit on both. So you can't say, oh, I forgot to file on my spouse and he was a high income worker, I should be getting his money. When they ask, have you ever been married? You're filing on all records that you qualify on. The exceptions for deemed filing is deemed filing applies to retirement benefits, not survivor's benefits. So you can delay your own if you're collecting on a widow benefit. So if you are widower, you can start your survivor benefits and delay your own as long as you want until the age of 70. And that is a good filing strategy if you had a significant work history that is more than your widower's benefit. So an example of deemed filing rules is Maria turns age 62 after January 1st, 2016. Her husband, Joe, is 65. They have both each worked enough years to retire, earn a retirement benefit. In March of 2020, Maria has reached her full retirement age and files for benefits. Maria is eligible for a spouse benefit on Joe's record. Maria must file for both benefits. She can no longer file for the spousal benefit and delay her own. She will receive a combination of the two benefits that equal the higher amount. Example 2, Jenny is a 62-year-old widow. She's eligible for retirement benefits based on her own work history, and she's also eligible for survivor benefits based on her deceased husband's record. She starts her survivor benefit this year, and she only applies for widow benefits. She does not start her own retirement benefits, allowing it to grow. At age 70, she starts her own increased retirement benefit, which she will receive the rest of her life. The new law does not affect her because deemed filing does not apply to widows' benefits. Another change that came about is voluntary suspension of benefits, also called the file and suspend. So before the change, a worker at the full retirement age or older applied for retirement benefits and then voluntarily suspended payment of their retirement benefits. The worker voluntarily suspension permitted a spouse benefit to be paid to their spouse while their worker was not collecting retirement benefits. The worker could then restart their benefits later, example, age 70, at an increased amount. So this policy applied because you couldn't, as a spouse, you couldn't receive benefits on a spouse's record unless that spouse, your current marriage, took their benefit. And this is for the monetary benefit, not the Medicare. So how this law changed is for requested submit after April 30th, 2016, you can still voluntarily suspend benefits payments at your full retirement age to earn the higher benefit by delaying. During a voluntary suspension, other payable benefits on your record, such as benefits to your spouse, are also suspended. So your spouse can't get a $1,000 check while you suspend your $2,000 check, so yours can continue to grow. Everything is suspended. If you have suspended your benefit, you cannot continue to receive other benefits on another person's record. There are some exceptions, like a divorced spouse. You can continue to receive your divorced spouse record, even if your ex-spouse voluntarily suspends. So they never punish a divorced spouse because unfortunately some people are rather malicious and want to punish their ex-spouse, but so this protects them. So if, like, let's say I'm 66 and I don't want to file until I'm 70, my divorced ex-spouse can still file on my record and receive regardless of what I do. When someone is filing early retirement before their full retirement age, they're under an early retirement work means test, okay? So for every $2 that they earn over this limit, Social Security reduces it by 1. So the limit for 2024 is $22,320 before any reduction applies. And what that means is you can make up to $22,320 at 63 if you're collecting Social Security, 64, 65, get all of your retirement checks from Social Security and still work. If you go over that amount, for every $2 you earn above the annual limit, Social Security deducts 1. And they deduct it when you do your work report. Usually in the beginning of the year is when it's federally legally due. Many people don't report it right away and they become overpaid. So if someone is still currently working and they're making significantly over that, first I calculate how much their personal insurance amount, PIA, is divided into how many checks that they would miss to see if it's even worth filing, taking a reduced amount, because whatever you file at, that's how much it is for the rest of your life, right? The next thing is, do they need the money now? So there's always an earnings test, and there's a special year that applies to one earnings year. And it lets them pay for the full Social Security benefit for any month they consider retired, regardless of the yearly earnings. So this happens a lot when someone goes to retire in the middle of the year. Maybe they've already made the $22,000, but if they're going to make less for the months after they retire, then they can draw their Social Security. So let's say they already made $22,320 and they go to retire in August. As long as August, September, October, November, December are under the monthly amount, so that $22,320 divided by 12, that monthly amount, they're due all those checks. And that's a big misconception where people think that they can't make $22,320 the entire year, January to December, but they have 1 year, that first year, they can apply that special earnings rule because it's not fair to count earnings until you actually retire, as long as you're actually retired. Now, if you make over that and you don't tell Social Security, they're gonna charge you an overpayment. So when someone turns full retirement age, I always say you can make $1 million. Nobody cares except the IRS. So the earnings limit is not capped, except you still continue to pay Social Security taxes on your earnings, and Uncle Sam does come for you with the IRS check. One of the things that I always get asked is, does my pension count? No, your pension doesn't count. This is earned income. Annuities don't count, investment income doesn't count, interest doesn't count, veterans benefits doesn't count, government and military retirement benefits do not count. This is earned income is what they're counting for this. Now, even if you do make $1 million after your full retirement account, another thing that does count is IRMA. And we're going to be talking about IRMA in another lesson. Stay tuned. So if someone has a question on how much they're going to get, or should they retire now, they can come over to this retirement earnings test calculator on socialsecurity.gov. They could just put it in, it'll come up on Google, and they can put in how much they're going to make. So let's say they're going to make $30,000 a year, and their estimated amount, let's do something easier, $1,500. Is the current year the first year you receive? So let's say no. Let's say they've been receiving. Let's say they're 50, 60, 61. So the earnings is in excess of the 22,000. It tells you that. And the difference is 7,680. They're going to withhold $1 in benefit for every $2 in excess. So they're going to divide this amount, and it comes to $380.40. So they're going to reduce their checks in the beginning of the year when they make their work report by $3,840. Okay, now it's always taken in the very beginning. So if I asks a worker for their work report in January 1st, and they say, Miss Joanna, I'm going to make $30,000 this year, and they're sure about it, I say, okay, we're going to withhold the first $3,840 of your benefit starting next month, February, March, and up until they reach that. So if their monthly benefit is $1,500 a month, they're going to skip 2 checks, so that's $3,000, and then $840 of the third check. So they would get a partial check. Now, those checks, they are simply not due. They don't go onto the back end. They're not being held to be paid later. It's simply not due to them because they did not meet the early retirement test. So a lot of workers, they get confused with the overpayments. Why am I overpaid? And they think that money is going to come to them when they're 67, and it's not the case. It's simply not due, was never due, if that's truly their earnings. And so they can play around with this and find their sweet spot. Maybe they can't prevent it. Maybe they don't know that they're getting all this overtime. And that happens so much where they are finding out in like November, Christmas season, that they have to work all this overtime because they work at Walmart and retail, and they're going to end up making, $32,000, and they're going to end up being over this amount, and it's going to be reduced. Now watch this. If it is the first year that they're currently reduced, if it's their first year of receiving benefits, so if they just filed for benefits, they can say yes. So this is a great tool. It's easy. The publication that I always hand out is called How Work Affects Your Benefits. So How Work Affects Your Benefits, this is a PDF updated every year by Social Security Administration. I give this to every worker so they know if they're still working, what those policies are, so they don't get overpaid. Because learning that you're overpaid, many people don't know that you can make a payment arrangement on an overpayment. So when you're typically overpaid, you get a letter in the mail saying, hey, Joanna, you're overpaid $5,000. They start collecting that in your full monthly check if you don't make a payment arrangement. And you can make a payment arrangement. They try to ask that all of those checks usually be paid back in 36 months or 60 months. They make a payment arrangement, and all you have to do is request it. But so many people never read their letters, and I see this on social media all the time, where people like, Social Security's taking back all of my monthly checks. How am I going to pay my bills? So this is really important, where people understand when they file, if they're still working, what checks they're actually due and how the calculations happen. Because if you don't understand the calculations, or to watch your earnings record, and you're taking on overtime, or you got a second job, you need to report, your worker needs to report their earnings limit, do a work report. It's very easy to do a work report to Social Security, so they're not overpaid. Because when they do get overpaid, notice goes out, and most people they wait until they're missing a check before they call and say, hey, I didn't get my check today. And Social Security's like, hey, we mailed you a couple letters saying that you were overpaid and that we were going to take it from your next check and you needed to contact us to make a payment arrangement. And so many people will be like, I didn't get my mail. I didn't open my mail. I didn't understand my mail. And that happens so often. But they're told when they file, they're asked if they're still working. And they're told to report work if they go back to work. Because a lot of times people might not be working when they file. Maybe they were laid off. Maybe they planned to retire and life happened and they didn't realize that their bills were more than their income. Happens so much, especially with inflation today. A lot of seniors are going back to work because of inflation. Rents are going sky high, insurances are going sky high. So it happens, we understand it, but the law is a law. They have to report their income because they can't simply double dip. So I always suggest that they read this and make sure they read it to understand it, because if they don't understand it, they're more likely to cause an error and they're not going to be happy when they make too much money and they get an overpayment letter and start missing checks because they don't understand how to navigate the system. And navigating the system is mostly the common issues is they don't understand how to navigate the system, make payment arrangements, make work reports. So if they do understand it at least, then they shouldn't be, financially destitute. Like I've seen some people who start missing all their checks for, it could be months. It could be, maybe I've seen people overpaid $10,000, $15,000, and Social Security starts collecting the next month's check because the person doesn't know that they can file a payment arrangement so they have some check to pay their bills, right? So this is the policy, and they talk about what income counts and when they count it. And like I said, it's usually earned income. They count self-employment when it's received, not when it's earned. So like insurance agents, we receive our monthly commissions. So it would be counted then. So I always keep this and I always give it to people when they are still working under full retirement age. That's the biggest thing. One of the questions is, will you receive higher monthly benefits later if benefits are withheld because of work? And yes, if some of your retirement benefits are withheld because of your earnings, your monthly benefit will increase starting at your full retirement age. This takes into account those months in which benefits were withheld. An example, let's say you claim retirement benefits upon turn is 62 and your payment is $910 per month, then you return to work and have 12 months of benefits withheld. They would recalculate your benefit at your full retirement age of 67 and pay you the $975 in today's benefits. So Social Security functions off of policy. Everything is a policy. And if you type in POMS, POMS, that stands for Program Operations Manual System. POMS, SSA, and the keyword is going to find the policy you're looking for. So the policy I was just looking for is when someone protests full monthly withholding, if they are due partial month checks, and they have to make that request either orally or in writing. They can also request the deferred work suspension. So if they're not due all their checks, they can request that it be suspended later on in the year if they allege that they will suffer extreme financial hardship unless they receive full payment for a limited time until their financial situation is better. They request the deferral on their own initiative, and they have no expectation of excess earnings in the following year and have no existing overpayment. Now, Social Security likes to make sure that it goes all of those factors to meet the requirements. So the prorated work suspension in certain circumstances upon the beneficiary's written request. So SSA can approve that. It does have to be in writing, and they have a policy for everything. And I was looking up the overpayment arrangement. It's 60 months that they can have a maximum of. Let's go back and look at that. So on POMS, so when they make a payment arrangement, the recovery rate has to be at least $10, and they try to request it in 12 months. If they can't get in 12 months, they can do it in maximum full recovery of 60 months, which is 5 years. They usually ask for allegations of their resources, income, and living arrangements to make that payment arrangement, but they can go as low as $10. They don't need this SSA 634 form if they can make the recovery in 60 months. If it's over 60 months, they usually do. And that allows them to, have a little bit more, especially if someone has a large overpayment, which happens usually when they are overpaid multiple years. If they continue to work and not report, and the IRS then reports it later to Social Security, because it's usually Social Security normally finds out in August, which you made the previous year and you filed on your taxes. And so if you were overpaid then year, and then you continue to work and overpay and don't report your wages correctly, it can happen. A lot of people don't really know that, because people's Part B payments get terminated because they don't open up any of those letters saying, hey, you didn't make your payment. And that's another class. But I'm going to teach you how to avoid that. But overpayment happens when people file for early retirement and they're still working, making too much money, and they did not do a proper work report. That boils down to it. So using the early retirement test tells them how many checks they should get, and they need to make sure that they're calculating their full amount before their taxes come out of their check, because they count it before taxes, not after taxes. All right, I think that's a good stopping point for this class. We have gone through entitlement, how to earn credits. That's almost the entire system of the Title II is all credit based. Are they insured for disability, retirement, and Medicare? So I'll see you next week. Bye.
That's a wrap. If this helped you close more deals, hit follow. New agent training drops every week only on Top Flight Insurance.